Now, coming to the next part, the second part of my discussion, that is about the initial political issues in Sri Lanka. Why these political problems emerged in Sri Lanka, that is the point I would like to discuss, and these initial political issues are between Sinhalese and Sri Lanka. So, the fight is between the Sinhalese and the Sri Lankan Tamils. Okay. Indian Tamils were taken recently, there is, even though they were disenfranchised and they were not given the rights and all, there is no major fight between them. Indian Tamils are less in number also, they were taken recently. So, see, for example, a good example of an Indian Tamil in Sri Lanka is Muthaiya Muralidharan. See, that famous spinner of Sri Lanka, Muthaiya Muralidharan was an Indian Tamil. His parents or grandparents migrated from India maybe in 1940s or something like that. I mean, that is what it was told. Anyway, so Muthaiya Muralidharan is an Indian Tamil, not a Sri Lankan Tamil. So, the problem, there are hardly any the problems were there, the problems between Indian Tamils and Sinhalese who got settled by their, many of them were, India managed to bring them back and we settled in 1960s and 70s. We have signed the agreement after the disenfranchising them in 1950s. Okay. So, those things we have settled, but the problem is between Sinhalese and Sri Lankan Tamils. And the problem is between the Sinhalese and the Sri Lankan Tamils began because of their equal rights, okay, the same thing. So, in 1948 Sri Lanka got independence. From British, and till then in the British administration, as part of their divide and rule policy and all, divide and rule policy, the Britishers maybe because of that, or the Tamils were more progressive, more educated, or more willing to adapt English education and all, during this British administration and after the British, most of the government posts were occupied by Tamils. So, Tamils were very progressive, educated, they were interested in government jobs, and they occupied many bureaucratic posts at that time. And the Sinhalese always looked at Tamils as as someone, they are minorities also, they were as someone who were close to the British administration. They were always seen as part of the British administration, on the side of the rulers. Finally, when in 1948 the independence, when Sri Lanka got independence, when the when the Sinhala or rather the majority community got the freedom and when democracy was initiated, naturally the majority of the Sinhali population, the majority Sinhalese got the power, and the moment they got power, their main focus was how to teach Tamils a couple of lessons. Okay. They always wanted to show Tamils their place, meaning they always wanted to tell them that don't, whatever you did till now, it is fine, but we will not allow you to do the same what you have done during the British time. They wanted to teach them a couple of lessons. So, their focus was right from the beginning how to how to put how to look down upon the Tamils. So, initially when the government started, the Sinhala majority and people, the Sinhalese expected more harsher rules and regulations against the Tamils. So, in 1956, I think a Sinhala nationalist called Solomon Bandaranaike, came to power, and he was an ultra nationalist, we can say. And the Bandara Naike was, they wanted, he is a majoritarian leader, majority, he wanted to impose the views of the majority over the minorities, and many steps were taken to reduce the status of the Tamils. And there is always, for Tamils, one big issue for the Tamils were always their, language. Language is a very sentimental issue for Tamils. In fact, even in India, even today in Tamil Nadu, the people of Tamil Nadu have a special place for language. Language, so the beauty of Tamil culture is language is equated to religion. Language has a status of religion. If you abuse your religion, if I abuse your religion, you will get upset. We are very sentimental about our religion. The same way, if somebody abuses their language, or if somebody gives less respect for the language, that was not acceptable for Tamils. So, Bandara Naike, when he was in power, his focus was how to reduce, and they one by one they were trying to, and Tamils were not Buddhists. Tamils were predominantly Hindus, and some of them were Christians. So, the focus was always to show Tamils as a second grade citizens of the country. So, the focus was on declaring Buddhism as a state religion, Buddhism as a state religion, not a secular state. Sri Lanka is not a secular state, state religion. Then Sinhala as the main language, or Sinhalese or Sinhala language as the main language or the national language, and many provisions for the Sinhalese, and the minorities were pushed back. So, this kind of majority appeasement policy was started by the Solomon Bandara Naike, and subsequently Bandara Naike was assassinated by a radical Buddhist, saying that he is not doing enough, like Mahatma Gandhi was killed by a Hindu. The same thing happened. Solomon Bandara Naike was assassinated by a radical Buddhist, claiming and saying that he is not doing enough for the community. And politics went on. In 1972 also they amended their constitution, and in the 1972, see, till then Sri Lanka had a dominion status. Sri Lanka abolished the dominion status. Dominion means they were still accepting the crown, the British crown, as the main as the main power, but they had self rule. But now in 1972 Sri Lanka abolished this dominion status and declared themselves to be a sovereign state. So, in 1972 they became a sovereign state. And in this 1972 constitution also, they made it a point that the Sinhala is the national language and the Tamil is not having the same status. So, Tamils always wanted the Tamil language to be given equal status that of the Sinhala language, but Tamil was not given an equal status, even in the 1972 constitution. In fact, after Solomon Bandara Naike died, or rather he was assassinated, his wife, his widow, Sirimavo Bandara Naike became the prime minister. Sirimavo Bandara Naike. Became the prime minister. And so, they were from the party called Sri Lankan Freedom Party. They belonged to the SLFP, Sri Lankan Freedom Party. Their main opposition party was UNP, United National Party. And this Sri Lankan Freedom Party was more a socialistic and all, whatever it is. Then finally, in 1978, the UNP came to captured power, and it was this is power came in the hands of Jayawardene. Jayawardene. And Jayawardene, he was a ultra nationalist, even from the United National Party, and he changed the constitution in 1978 and converted Sri Lanka into an executive president. He converted Sri Lankan constitution into an executive president post. Earlier it was prime minister who controlled, the parliamentary form of government, now an executive president post. And what the new constitution Sri Lanka, they have converted Sri Lanka into some sort of a French model. They converted Sri Lanka into a French model. What is the French model? French model has an executive president directly elected by the people, and they also have a prime minister who is the leader of the majority party in the parliament. Leader of the majority party. Like a French system. So, you cannot appoint, the president cannot appoint any prime minister just like that, only those who enjoy the majority in the parliament, like in Indian prime minister. So, they have an executive president, president has his own powers, who can the foreign relation, who can declare war and peace, everything is in the national security, everything in the hands of the president, and at the same time they have a prime minister who will be looking after the domestic laws and things like that. So, that is what they converted. Sri Lanka was converted an executive president in 1978, and Jayawardene ruled the country with an iron hand, we can say. He was more of an autocrat, and finally he gave up his, or rather he completed his term, and finally in 1979, sorry, in 1989, he completed his term. And when he has handed over his power to his deputy at that time, and through an election, he did not contest the election after that, because only 2 terms were prescribed, I think, at that time. So, because of that he gave up, and his own follower and supporter and number 2 in the cabinet at that time, a prime minister, it is Premadasa. He became the prime minister in 1989. Anyway, so that is how the political system in Sri Lanka was working, and the main thing happened during this initial years, whether 50s and 60s and 70s, especially in the first 3 decades of independent Sri Lanka. The main issue was that the Tamils were not treated as an equal citizen, especially the Sri Lankan Tamils. Sri Lankan Tamils were not treated as, Sri Lankan Tamils were not treated as equal citizens. They were not treated as equal citizens, and this has created a lot of ill will and disillusionment in the minds of the people. Okay, lot of ill will and disillusionment in the minds of the people, and especially among the the Tamils, disillusionment in the minds of the Tamils, and this has created subsequently a lot of problems. That is what we can see the Tamil problem. So, the Tamil problem started because of the attitude of the majority community, and Tamils were they were holding power, or they were part of the British system, and they lost everything, and now there is a lot of discrimination against the Tamils in the new independent constitution. That has made them very difficult to adjust. The biggest problem is they could not adjust to the situation, and they were very upset that they lost everything. So, that is how the initial political setup and the 1978 constitution came up, and after the end of the Jayawardene's rule, Premadasa came to power. He was subsequently assassinated by LTTE, and in 1995 or 1994 election, 94-95 election, we can say, a new president, again a Sri Lankan Freedom Party leader came to power, SLFP leader came to power, and that was Chandrika Kumaratunga. Chandrika Kumaratunga. Chandrika Kumaratunga is the daughter of Solomon Bandaranaike and Sirimava Bandaranaike. So, she is the third leader from the same family to become the president, and now it is the president because executive presidentship is going on. 1995 Chandrika Kumaratunga, and she got 2 terms. She completed the term, and in 2005, once Chandrika Kumaratunga completed her term, her deputy at the time, that is the Mahinda Rajpaksha, came to power in 2005, and he completely changed the history of Sri Lanka in the process. So, that is how the political leadership emerged, and now so that is about the, and then after Mahinda we will talk about that, the present leadership and all I will talk. So, that is how the political leadership changed, and how the political system in Sri Lanka evolved over a period of time. And as I told you, the first 3 decades the main focus was how to control and fight and show the Sri Lankan the Tamils a second class, a secondary status, or how to make them a secondary citizen. That was the main focus of the majority Sinhala population at that time. Okay. So, Premadasa was elected as president. Yes, now see, as I told you, from 1978 onwards, when the new constitution came, first you please remember, there is a executive president directly elected, then there is a prime minister also. Even Premadasa was a prime minister in the beginning, and subsequently he became in 1989 when Jayawardene completed his term. He contested for the president's post and he became the president. Jayawardene was assassinated in 1993 by LTTE. Then again, many things happened, and 95 presidential election, Chandrika Kumaratunga became the president of the country. She was earlier prime minister, then she became the president of the country. Similarly, Mahinda Rajpaksha was earlier the prime minister, then subsequently in the presidential election he became the president of the country. So, that is how many a times the former prime ministers will graduate themselves to become the president because they contest the election directly and they become, and once they are elected directly they become the executive president. So, in Sri Lanka what is going on is the executive president, and that is how the political setup is going on after 1978. So, please remember, for 1948 independence, it is a dominion status, it is a prime ministerial form of government. 1978 they changed that into executive president's post, right. So, that is about the initial political thing. Now,